Adventurers, welcome back to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. This is your host, Tom, or today I'm Spooky Tom, and Scary Lotus.
Whoa. I wasn't briefed about any Spooky Tom.
I'll be Spooky Tom. You can be Scary Lotus. This is Scary Lotus, my co-host, because it is Spooptober, and we're done talking about Daedric princes, which are pretty spoopy. Let's be honest. I was going to say several of them kind of fit the MO before we even got into Spooptober. Yeah. But a few years ago, I did like an entire month of Spooptober, and so we had to squeeze at least one weekend of something that is particularly creepy. And Lotus, I'm going to paint you another picture. I'm having fun doing this. I'm going to paint you a picture.
My mind's easel is prepped.
All right. So before we reveal the focus of this spooky episode, I want you to imagine that you're a Nord. You're a Nord in the cold north of Skyrim, and you and your family are settling down to a nice warm meal of sweet rolls. And out in the snow, you hear footsteps through the snow. And you're like, what is that? It's dark out. Why would there be something out? It's late. It's dark. And then you open the door and you don't see anything. And then around the back of the house, you hear like it's digging a hole.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
And you go in the back of the house. And you see in front of you a small group of human-sized creatures with no noses and pointy ears. And they're not goblins. And immediately they look at you without opening their eyes because they didn't actually see you coming. They only heard you coming. And they pull out their crude weapons. And you manage to fend them off. You scare them off. You're a mighty warrior of a Nord. And the next day you go back there and you see the remnants of the hole that they were digging and what they were doing. But in the dark, it was very hard to see these pale creatures. And so you tell your friends, hey, can you do a Nord voice?
Hey.
Great. So you go tell your friend Halberd, last night did you see anything in the snow?
Oh right, and I forgot we're Swedish.
And Halberd's like, what do you mean, Lotus? And then you're like, I swear there are ghosts, noseless ghosts in the snow. And this is how the story of the ghost things gets spread.
All right, cool. We should work on the title of the end of that, but outside that, all right. Okay, all right.
Yeah, but really, what you saw was a Falmer, and for a very long period of time, the Falmer, nobody really knew what the Falmer were. The Nords were being invaded on what they thought was their land by these goblin-looking things. And they came up with all sorts of different names for them, but they didn't actually know what they were. And this is the thing that I love the most about the story about the Falmer. I mean, and we're going to get into it. There's some really dark stuff that goes on and why the Falmer were the Falmer. But basically, they called them snow ghosts. And so you would have told your friend, hey, we were attacked by snow ghosts last night. And your friend would be like, oh, that's scary. But I'm a Nord, so I'm not scared.
So I refuse to be scared about this. But the idea to them is, I mean, other than their creation is super messed up, which we'll get into, they're just like one of those, it went, well, less bump in the night, more bump in the snow, but still.
Sure.
Yeah, they're creepy. And, since the majority of the population of Earth at this point has played Skyrim, I assume more than a few people have encountered these creepos.
Snow ghosts. Yeah. And I love the fact that was one of the titles that the Nords used. And so, I'm sure most of you who have played Skyrim have come across the Falmer. You've dug down into the earth. You've come across these creepy creatures. You figured out that they don't actually see you, but they hear you when you move around and they respond to the things they're hearing, which is really cool the way that actually works in the game. And you may have wondered, well, what are the Falmer? Where did they come from? And if you read through the lore and listen to some of the dialogue in the game, you eventually learn through some of the quest lines that these were snow elves. This was an entire race of elves, just like any other race of elves, high elves or dark elves or Dwemer, and they were in a tough situation. And we have to go back to the Merithic era. In the Merithic era, you have the snow elves have settled in the north. They're up in Skyrim, and they live on top of the land, and underneath the land in Skyrim and in Morrowind, you have the Dwemer. And then all of a sudden, there's a bunch of mannish creatures that just start showing up from across the sea. The Needs start showing up, and eventually they become the Nords, right? And they want that land for themselves because they don't have anywhere else to go. So you end up with this conflict between the Falmer, who are the snow elves, and that's what Falmer means, is just snow elf. It's not a name that was given to them once they turned into these terrible looking creatures. And they started losing the battle because the Nords were fearsome foes. You're going to say something, Liz?
Yeah. The other thing is, which we can do an episode entirely on, the ancient Falmer, as the kind of referred to as the older version of them before we'll get into their
current form.
De-evolution. I was going to say, it's not really so much an evolution as a de-evolution of their race, but related to them, there was a pretty long-standing war between the Needs and the Falmer, the ancient Falmer.
The ancient Falmer, the snow elves. And the snow elves were losing that battle. They were on the losing end of it.
They were known as being pretty fierce, adversaries for a while, but unfortunately with their level of cruelty to start with, which is ironic with how their whole existence comes to be, they, like I said, we'll get more into it in a snow elf episode, but some of their cruelty led to such brutal and just extreme retribution from the Nords and the Needs. So it's strange. It almost comes full circle with them, right? From their original being to their creation, which we're about to get into.
Right. It's like they kind of, what's it called? Where you reap what you sow, right? They reaped what they sowed. Kind of. So they end up losing the combat, the battles with the Nords. There's even stories about how Ysgramor cut off their noses in order to make sure that he could tell them apart from any other elf. And of course that stuff sounds apocryphal. It sounds kind of like mythology, right? But the fact that they were losing this seems to be hard lore facts. They were losing, and so they decided to put aside their conflict with the Dwemer, because the Dwemer didn't really get along with anybody. And they said, listen, you're elves, we're elves, maybe we can work out something and we can help each other out here in order to fight back the Nords. And the Dwemer weren't as bothered by the Nords because they lived mostly underground. They didn't have to deal with mostly what the Nords were doing. And there's some conflict between the Nords and the Dwemer, but at this point,
but not the same degree by
not
any
the
means,
same degree,
because they're not sharing equal. It's not a battle over equally looked for land. The Dwemer are beneath basically where the Nords want. The Nords don't want to dig down into the earth necessarily to live down there. Right. So there's way less conflict where, the land in question is definitely more of a hot topic between the two people both trying to live there and not being capable of getting along with each other for more than 10 minutes. Right.
So the Falmer were desperate and they decide, okay, well, we need to team up with the Dwemer. With the Dwemer's help, maybe we can push back the Nords. But they had the most to lose, and they were at the losing side of this conflict. And so the Dwemer took advantage of it. And basically, the negotiation went something like this. We will help you out, but you have to work for us. And if you're going to work for us, then we get to basically eventually evolved into slavery. And on top of that, they took advantage of the situation and fed them a toxic fungi that slowly damaged their evolution over time. It seems like this may have taken a few generations, but over time, they lost their eyesight because of this.
Right. And with the way that the Dwemer are known for being so methodical in these stories and calculating, and really it's kind of, almost devoid of any moral compass in many situations, it seemed very much like, hey, how can we twist this to our advantage? No, we'll totally help you. Come on down. But we're going to need you to, pay your fair share. And the whole time while they're there, it's like, oh, how can we subtly turn this from like this being a thing where you help us to just, you're not going anywhere because you physically can't. And now we just have perma slaves.
Right. We've got these underground creatures that can't see, so they can live in the dark. We can feed them whatever we want, toxic fungi. They've now become slaves. And so over time, the Falmer lose the war with the Nords. The deal with the Dwemer doesn't work out. And eventually they become enslaved to the Dwemer. And then you have the moment where the Dwemer disappear from all existence. So you have all of these locations across Skyrim and Morrowind where the Falmer are living enslaved by the Dwemer underground, and all of a sudden their masters disappear. But they are not the same thing that they were when they worked out this deal. They're still intelligent creatures, but their society has completely changed. They can't see. Their bodies have morphed into these goblin-esque like creatures. They're hunched over. They don't even have the same semblance of language because it's just not the same as what they were. Enough time has gone by. And all of this happens between like the Merthic era and the first era of the world. And so now you have the second era, the third era, all the way to the events of Skyrim, of these Falmer living underground in their own societies, not needing to come to the surface unless they want to. And then when they do, so much time has passed that none of the Nords that are alive anymore even recognize them for what they originally were. And so it goes back to the story I was giving at the beginning. You have this situation where these creatures are showing up randomly and at first very sparsely throughout history. Just kind of on occasion, you would get the story of a snow ghost, or maybe somebody thought it was a vampire, or maybe somebody thought it was a goblin. And these weird stories of strange creatures that go bump in the night. Turns out that they used to be a noble and mighty race of snow elves, and they've been set low and now live underground and seem like these monstrous creatures that just come out every so often.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, before we press too far forward, as that they've been around for literally thousands of years at this point. Before the Dwemer were wiped from the plane of Nirn, like you had mentioned, one thing that's interesting is that basically they, as we had mentioned, to flee the battle with the Nords, they went down into the Dwemer mines and all that, and were essentially enslaved again. But then actually, they actually had a rebellion against the Dwemer as well, more or less just from years of enslavement. And I'm guessing it's one of those things where your other senses pick up as you lose senses. Right. And that's very apparent in games because they borderline have sight. Their hearing is so good. Right.
Right. Yeah. You can sneak right in front of them if you're quiet enough and your sneak skill is very high and you're very quiet and slow in your movement. But it's really, for the most part, their hearing, their directional hearing is so good they can essentially see you. In fact, they can even cast spells and shoot arrows at things in the dark that they can't see and still hit them.
It's almost like a form of radar type of thing.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a good point from Rob. Actually, they have archers.
Right.
It's like, that's
blind archers really and magic users just throwing fireballs at things they hear.
With the, I mean, all the Mer have the, larger pointed ears in the series type of thing, but you can almost think of it as like bats with sonar with a lot of these. And
their ears are even bigger and more like out.
They're coned a little more.
Right. They kind of stick further off of their heads. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Have a bat vibe.
Yeah. That might play into it.
That's one of the things that I assume that as their sight degraded as a result of the abuse of the Dwemer, and their other senses picked up, that was where they kind of form their own rebellion. They're referred to as the betrayed type of thing. And again, it's actually referred to specifically as the War of the Crag. And it was kind of interesting because specifically, those that they fled from, the Nords above, who basically like, hey, cool, we got all this land now. Looks like we're good to go. No more snow elves. It's really interesting to think that below them, the same people they pushed out are now battling the people who quote unquote saved them. And that was going on. They had totally oblivious to it. They're just like wreaking havoc down there. There's a whole different civil war going on below them while they think everything's fine upstairs. So it's really weird. That's just like, unfortunately, the different races, Tamriel, it's a rough place. The arena idea from Arena was a good idea. It's definitely a theme they've stuck with, where everything is like, oh, it's so pretty. Also, life is brutal and everything is awful all the time, and in amongst the pretty sites. So it's interesting to the Falmer and ancient Falmer, or betrayed version of the Falmer, have essentially just been like, after their initial reign, just a whipping race, unfortunately, where it's just like, oh man, just one horrible thing, another horrible thing, another horrible thing. It's like they've had a rough existence.
Yeah. There's it's been a rough existence, and so currently, and for the last few ages of the world, for the last few eras, they live underground and they build these little shacks. They've got like disheveled clothing. They do have those among them who can still cast magic. As you come across them in combat, you find that out pretty quick. They also have a certain type of animal that they like to cultivate for their own reasons. And these are the, what are they called? The chaurus.
The chauruses.
The chaurus and the shell bugs, which makes sense. So like, this is like their cattle. And it hadn't occurred to me that playing through the game that this functions in that way. I kind of thought, and if you actually look at the structure of the buildings, that they have these like pens and kennels for them.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's like their dogs or something. No, this is their cattle. This is what they grow and then eventually kill and then eat. This is their food source.
Or use as forms of protection, because they're pretty nasty to deal with if you piss them off.
Right. So they keep a bunch of these animals underground. They don't have a whole lot of resources underground. It's not like they can chop down trees or things, and things like fungus that grow underground are not very strong. And so a lot of their equipment that they use is made out of chaurus parts of like shells and claws and bone and these kinds of things. And they've pieced together their own little society. Now, what's deceptive about this society is that you would assume that they wouldn't be very organized. But one of the things that we're told is by the time of the events of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, they seem to be amassing in numbers larger than they've existed before. They've thrived underground. And there's even rumor that they might be plotting some sort of takeover of the surface, that they're actually amassing numbers in order to have some sort of coordinated attack on the Nords. Not just these little skirmishes where they just pop up on the surface every so often and run across a farmer or something, but an actual coming back to the surface. And we don't know much about this because we don't have a whole lot of books written by the Falmer explaining their plans and those kinds of things. But it's one of those things that's interesting about the way the lore plays out, in that their numbers have increased and the danger has increased as well, which is really pretty cool. They also have, and this is cool, Lotus, they also have a language and a actual alphabet. And this is something that I really didn't realize. So, like, actually looking at the letters, and you guys will have to pull this up on your own. Just look up Falmer alphabet or Falmer language, and you'll find that they're kind of scribbles. They almost look like Daedric letters, but they're actually written out. And I would imagine that these were more for touching and feeling eventually as they lost their sight, but originally would have been visual. I was going to say
they must be more of a carving style than like a brush stroke thing, because otherwise how would they be able to use it.
Right,
So I assume that whenever this is used, it's almost like a different form of something like Braille. And instead of like a raised dot or something like that, it's almost like a specific style of scratching maybe to form these shapes. Like just using these characters might not be useful.
Right. And these letters and things were designed during the time of the snow elves, the ancient Falmer, when they could see. But I could imagine that this is still something that they pass down to each other. They still communicate. They still have societies. There's still a level of intelligence among them. So to find these etchings and things is, maybe they still read them. Maybe they still can understand the language. We don't really know. Again, it's one of those like mysterious things where like you can find old ancient monuments in places like where the Dwemer used to live, where the Falmer originally were, with these letters. But who knows? Maybe the Falmer still communicate in ways that we don't understand. So it's one of those mysteries. It may not be a thing, but it might be a thing. And so I feel like it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So, yeah, the Falmer are just super creepy in that, like, they are the scary things that go bump in the night, and they are that way because they were made into that, because they didn't start that way, and that just by itself is worth doing a creepy episode.
Yeah, their transformation is very jarring, especially when you see what they looked like beforehand, which is very regal, very that's very Altmer-esque, with just like, you can tell that it's like a lot of civility and stuff amongst their culture. And then when you see what they end up with like thousands of years later, and it's like, woof, that is quite the fall from grace, so to speak. Yeah. And I can also see in the way that they look why some people might think they're vampires, because they have they've got the pointy ears, the sharp teeth, the kind of gaunt, pale faces. Yep. They look kind of vampiric, confusing mix,
a little bit bat-like. I'm trying to remember back to, it's so hard to go back, right? It's hard to remember like the first time I played Skyrim and when I came across these for the first time, what I thought they were. I don't think I understood what they were at all. I was like, oh, now I'm in some weird dungeon place. Or I think it was probably one of the quests where you start out in a location that's like a Dwemer ruin or something like that. But then as you dig deeper, you go into the caverns underneath the ruin. And then all of a sudden these things show up. Yeah, I remember thinking at first, like, when playing through, from best I can recall, is I was like, oh man, the goblins in this are messed up. Like, until I realized it's like, nope, that's not the same thing. Right. And it's weird because they are humanoid shaped. So the question was like, I remember coming across them and thinking like, oh, these things are intelligent, but they're not really. But can they see? Can they not? It took me a little while to realize that, like, when I killed one and looked close enough that it didn't really have eyes. And I was like, are they able to see me? Are they, because like you mentioned before, they respond so well as if they can see things sometimes, right, but they can't. So I remember like testing that out. Like, if I shoot an arrow against the wall over there, does it turn and find me, or does it go to where the arrow landed? Right. Like, right, which sound is it responding to? Or is there a visual here? Or if it's looking towards me and I move, like, or I shoot or do something, does it see me? Like, how can I make a sound rather than, like, how do I know how to test this? I just remember all of those questions about, like, how does this work? And then coming across their little huts, their little homes, and feeling like, well, these are meager, but these creatures actually make things. They've created their own little world down here. And then as you get deeper and deeper into their settlements, you find more and more of them kind of nested together, and they're organized. More complex. Yeah. Because I was going to say, some of the rope bridges they had connecting them and stuff like that. That's, I would assume, a long period of time in order to craft this stuff when you can't see it. Like, right. Having this all come about and form these underground cities and stuff like that, it's got to be such a time-consuming thing, especially when you've got the area down in Blackreach and all of that under Skyrim, and they explore a lot more of that in ESO before some of the caves collapse going into Skyrim the game. Mm-hmm. Because so much time has passed, but they were much more open originally before some of the cave networks kind of collapsed in and sectioned themselves off and stuff like that. You could see that they were just like straight up settlements that they had constructed underground, and it's like done in the darkness. So they have the advantage against any prey who
literally uses sight to try to get around. It's like they're at the advantage when you're underground, and you've got that weird ambient glow that stuff like Blackreach has, where it's just like that bluish purple type of coloring that comes out of all the rocks and the geodes and stuff like that. But using that to light your way is a lot different than just like, okay, well, I don't need to rely on sight. Like, just pitch black is totally fine with me, because I'm sensing where you are based on your sound, where you don't know how to attack me if you can't see me.
Yeah.
So they become kind of the predators in that area instead of the prey.
Yeah. It's kind of a creepy thing. It's one of those things that, like, if I were younger when I played the game for the first time, I probably would have been a little bit more creeped out going down into the depths and coming across these guys, as opposed to playing it as an adult. And the other thing I really like about them is the design of, like, the armor and the way that they're using, again, the materials of, like, the shells and the pieces of things that they get. And I always found it odd that, like, by the time I was exploring Dwemer ruins and then exploring Falmer locations and those kinds of things in the game, oftentimes the armor and the weapons from the Falmer were some of the better things I could find just out in the world. So I'd end up having to use them. And then I always felt weird.
They're just very heavy.
Right. And then even the helmets even occlude the eyes. So I remember feeling like it's just so weird to be walking into, like, a village, right, with this, like, Falmer armor on. Like, I look like a weirdo. Like,
hello, fellow humans.
Right, like, what is going on? It's so weird. I remember that phase of the game for a few hours, just wearing some of that gear before I found better gear and leveled up, being just like, this is really weird, but it's the best thing I have right now. So I guess I'm just going with it.
It is. It's actually like a pretty decent mid-tier type of weapon and armor. The problem is, like I had mentioned, it's very, very heavy, which is kind of interesting, because it's aesthetically, it's like a weird mix between sort of almost like bone mold and like chitin. Mm-hmm. But then it's like when you really look at it, it's like, it almost looks like when you I don't know, it always, it's probably just sort of the art style of the time with Skyrim when it came out in 2011. But it always made me think of, like, when you're in art class and you have, like, that like modeling clay. Uh-huh. That's what so much of their stuff looks like. Like their shield specifically just looks like this glob of modeling clay that somebody, like, pounded flat and stuck some bone fragments in. And it's just like, yep, this is my weapon.
There you go.
Yep, gonna bash you with this.
That's it.
But apparently it weighs a lot, so...
Yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, you're using the carapace of giant insects in order to,
exactly,
guard yourself. And creepy stuff. I love these guys. I think that they're really cool. And I love that there's more to it. And eventually you find out more about the story and the relation to the ancient snow elves. And we'll have to do a lot of that stuff on its own episode where we can dig more into...
an ancient Falmer episode as opposed to, the current Falmer.
Right. And the ancient snow elf that you get to meet and all of the events that go with that. So we'll save that stuff for another episode. But we need to take a quick break. We're going to thank our patrons, and then I'm going to be back because I want to read from you another one of the books. So this has been fun, reading one of the books at the end of the episode. So we'll do the break and we'll be right back.
This is Miss Morak, Dragonborn, and you are educating yourself to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast.
This week we've got a bunch of new patrons, so we got to welcome some new people. We have Thomas B, Ron Carr, AMR 198, Eric P, and Grant signing up on the Patreon. Welcome to the Patreon. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you are enjoying the bonus episodes and all the extra stuff that you can get over there, the ad-free episodes and all of that. If you're interested in joining us, go to patreon.com/Elder Scrolls Lorecast and check out all the different tiers. If you sign up as a tier 4 or higher, this week you'll get to join us on the chat episode which is just 1 week away. It is currently the 20th as we record this on Thursday night live on Twitch. And on the 27th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, we will be meeting with our patrons to discuss something. And I think it would be really cool to talk about creepy stuff again. I always like creepy stuff and maybe come at it from a different angle. But patrons, jump on the Discord. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have some ideas of things that we could discuss next week and what you guys want to talk about. And also, I don't say this enough. If you're still somebody who's catching, like if this is in the future and you're like, I've got another 100 episodes to go before I catch up, I'll join them then. A lot of times people put that off. They put off joining the Patreon in order to wait till they've listened to everything. You don't need to have listened to everything. It's totally cool. We would rather just get to meet you and have you join us. So don't worry about that. And on top of it, if you sign up for the Patreon now instead of later, you don't have to listen through all the ads because you'll have all the ad-free episodes. So that's the way it's designed that way. So you don't have to actually wait till you get through the 200 plus episodes before you can come join us. So go check that out. And thank you to our new patrons. Also, thank you to all. We're at 111 right now, 111 patrons, and our 3 Daedric Princes, Dylan A, Kira C, and Noodle Al Dente. Thank you for your support. Very much appreciated. And we have a new review. This one came in on Apple Podcasts. So if you leave a 5-star rating and a review, I'll read it out on a future episode. This one says, best TES podcast out there by Hail the Hammer X. Hail the Hammer in the US. And they write, this is the most well put together and engaging podcast out there. And to top it off, it's man, I can't read. It's full of so much lore and digestible information about TES. This is my go-to, and it's the only one I can watch over and over without getting tired of it. Keep up the great work, and thank you. And they mentioned watch here. I wonder if they're watching the YouTube version of the show, which
I'm glad they enjoy it.
Has a small
inability to read the review,
but small, but a little, quaint little audience over there.
Hey, it's why it's there. I was going to say, just keeping it available for however people like to check it out, I guess.
Yeah, and listen to me stumble over words. So Thank you so much, Hail the Hammer, and everybody else for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. All right, let's move on with the rest of the show.
You're listening to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast, dear child of cities. That is why the Night Mother loves you.
So when we were prepping for this episode, I told Lotus, I was like, hey, Lotus, I want to read another story. There's one I want to read about the Falmer. And he's like, I think I know which one it is.
Yes, this is a good one.
This one is called Ghosts in the Storm. It's also an inspiration for a bit of the little intro thing I did.
Yeah.
Ghosts in the Storm by Adonato Leotelli, author's tale of his encounter with the Falmer. For many years now, I have traveled the length and breadth of Skyrim, writing of my experiences and my adventures. I have seen many wondrous sights and many strange creatures in my travels, but one encounter remains fixed in my memory, though I wish it were not. I had taken up traveling with one of the Khajiit trade caravans that crisscrossed Skyrim, peddling their wares outside the gates of the large cities. By the way, this just occurred to me. Wouldn't it make sense for the Khajiit come from like a hot desert land? But man, it's got to be beneficial to have all that fur in the cold north.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a double win. Yeah.
Double win. Yeah. Always play a Khajiit in Skyrim. Anyway, going on. We were nearing Windhelm, which, by the way, I didn't mention in the first part of the show. The slaves the Falmer slaves of the Dwemer actually helped build Windhelm. It's another funny little lore tip.
Yeah, that's actually a good little side
note. I don't know. Part of why I think it's included in this story is because it's relevant to the Falmer. So I was nearing Windhelm when the storm struck. It was a violent and terrible gale, one of the very worst I have seen in all my long years. The winds howled like all the Daedra of Oblivion, and the driving snow made us blind to the world. Risad, I suppose would be his pronunciation in Khajiit voice, called a halt, and we staggered from the road, our hands held over our faces to ward off the stinging pellets of ice. We huddled together in the shelter of a copse of pines. There was no hope of raising our tents. The wind would tear them from our hands the moment we unpacked them. They struck at the height of the storm. There were perhaps half a dozen of the creatures. It was difficult to say as the blowing snow and howling wind overwhelmed our sight and our hearing. And like Lotus has mentioned, that's not a problem. Well, at least the sight part for the Falmer. Yeah. So
that's a one-way problem for this situation.
Right. They were roughly man-sized, but hunched over and ugly. For garments, they were only rags and leathers. They were armed with daggers and swords and various kinds. No doubt scavenged from their previous victims. They had no noses to speak of, only long slits for nostrils. Their ears were sharply pointed, suggesting a distant kinship with the elves. With their pallid skin and lifeless black eyes. Oh yeah, the little most of the time they've just got that what looks like skin over the eyes, but some of them do look like they've just got black.
Yeah, beady little black eyes.
It's just they don't even look around. They're just kind of there, right? They seemed like something out of a nightmare. Bisha saw them first, but too late to save herself. So loud was her death cry, we heard it over the roaring winds. That cry saved us all. Alerted to the presence of our foes, the Khajiit drew their blades and formed a circle, facing outward. The white fiends were too few to surround us completely, and the Khajiit fended off each attack. After 3 of the snow devils had fallen, the rest fell back and did not come at us again. The storm abated, and we arrived in Windhelm the next morning. I have taken up residence in Candlehearth Hall, and I find I'm quite comfortable behind the towering stone walls of the city. Comfortable, at least until I go to sleep and visions of those awful creatures return to haunt my dreams. Spooky stuff. This idea of these creatures just coming out of the snow, and you have no idea where they're from, no idea of the complexity of their history or even their community groups. These aren't just beasts in the wild.
Right. And it's one of those things, since originally they were so much just like an underground race after all these years. It's interesting that in the time of Skyrim, they've started to come surface side. And it's like, is there more of a reason they're starting to come surface side? Or is it just, because it's not even just just barely outside some of the caves. Some of them have strayed pretty far out. It's like maybe they're, as a whole, they've decided, that's enough being down here. Maybe it's time to see if we can reclaim the surface.
Yeah, if you think about the reasoning for doing it, they have the food they need. They have all of the resources that they need underground. In fact, they're very well designed at this point, or evolved or devolved, to live in the tunnels and the caves that they live in. They've got food, they've got community, they have everything they need. Why risk the surface where they're at a disadvantage unless there's some sort of greater purpose? So
the other thing that it's not really ever addressed anywhere. And ironically enough, this situation of them kind of attacking in the snowstorm is like a weird parallel to what I kind of want to bring up. But one thing that I've always thought is an interesting just what if, as they can roam out of the caves and stuff like that. One of the benefits of being encased in caves or underground will give you a better sense of directional sound because it's an enclosed area. Mm-hmm. Sound in a giant open field is not the same as sound in an enclosed section, a hall, a cave, whatever.
Regardless a building.
How big, a building. Yeah. So it is interesting that a lot of these things that they've kind of got as a huge advantage, I'm curious actually how much of a threat they would be surface side, actually outside. It seems like they would be somewhat limited on what they could do, especially what with, fighting them in an open field or something like that. It's situation of the storm is beneficial because they have that at least to their advantage, where it's like sight again is not an option. And everybody's working on hearing at that point. And at that point, they'll have, that advantage. But it just seems like it might be harder to use some of their newly acquired gifts as well, surface side, as much.
Whoever they're up against is, let's say they go out of their caves on a sunny day.
Yeah.
They are now going up against Nords or whatever race who now has the ability of sight and they don't. So even if they could, in the distance, hear them and focus on where they are at a distance with their ears, they still don't have the ability of sight. so somebody could sneak up behind them.
Right.
They wouldn't even have a sense of being able to organize in, say, rows for, like warfare tactics, because they just aren't organized like that. And you have to be able to see in order to line up in a row, right? It's very hard to hear your way into your place in a row. Like, that doesn't really work. So it seems like the heightened qualities of hearing and smelling and those kinds of things work in a more confined space because there's less room to move around, but would also be beneficial in like a storm or in the middle of the dark. Like, they are designed not for massive groups of siege warfare, the way that the Nords could do things, but as guerrilla forces coming out when it's disadvantageous to whoever they're attacking. So I would imagine a force of Falmer organizing and taking on the Nords of Skyrim would be like bandits showing up late in the night. Like, imagine if the city of Markarth was sieged through tunnels that come up into Markarth, and then a bunch of Falmer come out at night while most people are asleep. And even the guards with their torches would be at a disadvantage because these things could hear them, hear the crunching of the torches, hear the clanking of the guards' boots, and then maybe take them out before they're able to respond, and then break into homes, kill people in their sleep, all of that kind of stuff too. So I would imagine that this would be much more, it's almost like a bunch of ninjas taking on people in the darkness, right? Rather than, showing up and saying like, we challenge the Nords to war, and then marching like 1,000 strong in big lines with spears. And, I don't think they're going to do that. But a coordinated effort across a major region of Skyrim where they take out all the villages all at the same time in different places would be extremely scary.
Right. You just constantly have that like looming fear of random attacks, basically.
Right.
From an enemy that you kind of don't really have a lot of understanding of because they've just been so sectioned off for so long.
Right. And they're living underneath you. It's not like there's a safe place to go because they could just come out of another hole in the ground, as far as you know.
Yeah.
It's frightening. It's like when you think about the way that would work, like,
they're literally just this looming threat just hovering in the darkness, essentially.
Right. Like, have you ever had a creature in your yard that you didn't want that burrowed in the ground? Like
a
possum or something like that, right?
Drives me mad.
Right. Now imagine that thing's man-sized and there are a few more dozen of them down there, and they'd be happy to just murder you and take all your stuff.
Yep.
That's very scary.
That's very unnerving.
That's very unnerving. It's one thing to deal with like a possum in your backyard. It's another to be like, Falmer? That's rough. It's rough. So that's why I think that these guys are scary, and I think that they're kind of a fun thing. Anything else you want to bring up about the Falmer before we wrap up the episode?
Not really. I think we kind of covered a lot of it. Like we had mentioned, we're gonna do something separate on like the snow elf version of them in their ancient form, because although they are the same, they are just like a literal different version of it. They feel better as two separate things.
And you can look at it from a different perspective. I want to look at the world from the perspective of the Falmer in this one, and to see the world from the perspective of the ancient snow elves is a very different kind of thing.
Very much so. And it's actually, Rob has a great analogy. It's the Chimer and the Dwemer. It's like, well, okay, yeah. Technically, yes, but it's a different scenario, and it very much feels that way, especially because over time and after all of this, so very much has changed with them, and they really are essentially unrecognizable.
Yeah. Do you think, last question, do you think we're going to see more Falmer in Elder Scrolls 6?
I would be surprised if we do, because they do seem like they're relatively confined to the Skyrim region.
But what about like if we get Hammerfell and we get like mountains that are on the border with Skyrim,
like Snow Peak type of thing? Mm-hmm. Maybe, but so it's interesting you say that, because again, the only place with the current most recent active game being Elder Scrolls Online, when we did the Skyrim expansion, specifically Western Skyrim, we did encounter more Falmer and the Chorus and like all this stuff. And it wasn't really surface side. It was actually, underground. It was when you went to Blackreach. So it would be interesting to see if we're in that type of region again. Is there more of a reason to why they're coming surface side?
Yeah.
There's no real guarantee that there isn't. So I'm not really too sure if we would see them again with a more advanced, like, is there like an actual plot to them coming surface side, or are they literally content down in the, underground, and then just some bandit groups come up and like just mug people for the sake of it type of deal.
Sure.
It's hard to tell. So I don't know. And that's assuming that any of us are, still around by the time Elder Scrolls 6 comes out.
Yeah. Or the one after that, if maybe they show up in that one.
At that point, maybe we've devolved into Falmer. So who knows?
Yeah. Here's one. Okay, I lied. One more question.
All right.
One more question. Right. So there is speculation. I did a video about this on my YouTube channel. Go check out Robots Radio on YouTube. I do YouTube things. In fact, I do have these hilarious Skyrim VR videos where I'm doing ridiculous things like petting the horses, actually petting the horse, and some ridiculous. Go check that stuff out. But anyway, that's not why I brought this up. There is a rumor that Starfield will have ray tracing. So like RTX ray tracing light, and you can ray trace other stuff too, but mostly game devs use it for light. So if they build into the engine the ability to do ray tracing and actually model the bouncing of light in a room or on a starship from a star or through a cave. Okay. What if Elder Scrolls 6 takes more advantage of ray tracing technology and
does it from a sound perspective
and can do it from a sound? Like, what if you could bounce the actual, like your footfall sounds are modeled and bounce through the cave and make the Falmer aware of where you are, or creatures that can see, like the Charis, I assume they can see the light cast from the spell in your hand or your torch, and that's what clues them into you being nearby. Even if you're sneaking and they can't quite see you in that moment, they can see the extent of the light that you're casting.
Yeah,
just like in a real situation.
Wild tech,
right? Wouldn't that be amazing? But like
that would be wild. But
this is one of those things that like it. Go ahead. Go.
It would just be that would be. I mean, again, that is. If something like that would be like hyper ambitious, but it would lead to some, if you were willing to mess with it. And I mean, Bethesda sort of kind of does stuff that's pretty neat. Sometimes you can tell it's just screwing with their own tech stuff more than.
But they love systems on top of systems on top of systems.
It would be kind of cool if you could throw stuff, or like fire an arrow and get them to look another way so that you can shank them in the back or something like that.
And you can kind of do that. Like you can do that in the game now. You can shoot an arrow if you're hidden and you shoot an arrow and it hits a wall. People will go, "What's that?" And they'll go look at where the arrow landed.
Right.
Like that does happen, and there's some of that works, but one of the complaints about games like Skyrim is that like the sneaking isn't very realistic. You get real good at it, and you can stand right in front of somebody in the light, and they can't even see you, right? But yeah, it's a video game. What if you actually had the bouncing of light, and so it wasn't just like, are you standing in the shadow part of the room? Are you crouching? What if it was actually modeled? So that like you knew if the thing goes, oh, there you are, they see you, like, and you were to play that back and somehow pan the camera around from the other side, that like your shoulder is sticking out, or that like you walked into the cave and you had your torch out and the torchlight bounced off of a few walls down a corridor and into the main room. And then people in the main room saw the light just like you would in a freaking regular room. Like if I walked into your house with a flashlight and I shined it at your windows, you'd be like, who's outside my house shining that flashlight?
Right. Well, the thing that I always do find interesting when you relate this stuff to it being a video game and an RPG, where it's like, normally, okay, I'm holding said torch. Mm-hmm. The better you get at sneak, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. I'm getting it better at hiding me holding this torch.
Right.
To be better
so you would have to put the torch away.
Right.
And then on top of that, you could, like, any of the lights in the room, like, remember those Thief games? Like, you could put out the lights, and then you would and in the Thief games, they would model, like, you're standing in a shadow, and then you're like, visibility meter would drop because you were standing in the shadow. But what if it was actually modeled in a way where, like you're standing in the shadow, but, like, your shoulder is, like, there's still light hitting your shoulder. The ray trace light is hitting your shoulder, and it knows that the light is hitting your shoulder. It's not about being in the right spot in the room. It's about actually physically taking cover in a way that works in reality. I mean, it's probably more meticulous than you would need to do, but the idea of that kind of tech is really cool.
I know what you mean by the idea of it. The only thing is, like, I'm trying to think of how to gamify that in a way. Like, that would make sense in a game where you have a standard level of, okay, I need to hide or whatever. Mm-hmm. But unless they were to remove the concept of sneaking or something like that, it seems like, how would you necessarily have a system where you could get better or worse at sneaking unless you were more...
Maybe you get awareness of how much of where the light is on your body.
Right. Like, maybe it's like,
maybe you get a visual representation. Like, what if you get a visual representation on, like, the bottom right side of this? When you go into crouch,
it's like you're aware your knee is currently very visible.
Just like if you were to kind of walk into a room with a bright light and you're trying to hide behind a pillar, and you would, like, look around and you'd look at the way the shadow was cast from that pillar, and then you would stand in a way that your body wasn't lit by any of the light coming past the pillar.
So it would almost become like a bonus to your awareness of your hiding, as opposed to, I'm bad at sneak, so I'm literally a giant, very loud, like, light post.
Right.
And then I become darkness itself.
Yeah. But on top of it would be sound too, because the sound would echo through the hallway. So if you're stomping around in iron boots, then you've got more of an awareness of, like, how far that sound is actually getting in front of you.
Sure.
You know, that kind of thing. I'm not a game dev by any means. And, I don't know how.
It's an interesting idea.
You wouldn't want it to be too complex to the point where it would make the game not fun, but there might be fun ways. That's always
a line. I would imagine you've got to kind of skirt.
But there might be fun ways to work the tech in that make it kind of more interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just it's the infant baby of a thought.
Is so new to being common. It's interesting to think of what people might end up doing with it down the line,
right,
as it becomes more readily adopted.
Right. And by the time we get something like an Elder Scrolls 6, it's going to be like 4, 5, 6 years from now. We might even have another series of consoles out, better ray tracing capabilities, a bunch of new graphics cards by then, and it might be one of the things you can turn on, turn off. But if you turn it on, then you know that when like Rob says in chat, the seeing eye dog Charis saw the light cast from your torch. It's because, oops, I didn't put my torch away. That light bounced 2 or 3 rooms ahead of me, and the Charis thought, there's something over there, so it came to look.
Sure.
So I don't know. Could be fun.
Interesting thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. Chat and listeners, let us know what you think. Join us on the Discord. Send us messages on Twitter. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Lotus, you got anything else going on?
We announced our Extra Life date coming up. We finally got it all ironed out. We're going to be streaming for the Extra Life charity and the Children's Miracle Network hospitals on December the 3rd. So starting to prep all of that stuff up, getting in touch with Zoss and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages to organize some giveaways and incentives for people for helping out with the charity marathon. So that's like our big thing that I'm very excited to get kind of like started, because it's been a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Other than that, just recorded Tales. The episode actually came out earlier today, and just kind of continuing stuff on my YouTube, where we're covering more dungeons. We're actually, as of tomorrow, when I release Spindle Clutch 2, we will be done every base game dungeon and some of the DLCs. So
wow,
if you're interested in the storylines to these dungeons and the Elder Scrolls Online, but don't have a group, don't want to make another character to redo it, anything like that, that's why they're there. They're just storyline playthroughs, not really anything beyond that. And I started Daggerfall, the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, which is interesting.
Yeah, with the Unity version, right?
Based on everyone's suggestions, I am doing the Unity version. And honestly, after about 3-ish hours of gameplay from stream, it's really fun. I played. It's real ahead of its time.
I played maybe an hour of it, and eventually got out of that first dungeon.
Okay.
And then traveled across a good swath of a continent, even though the continent is huge.
It's comically large.
It's ridiculous.
It's comically large.
Yeah. But I was impressed for it being such an old game, and the limitations of the graphics and things like that. Also, the weird scaling of things, like the distances between buildings in a town, are just odd.
Sure. But then there's some features where it's like, one of the things that blew my mind was the ability to climb, like as a skill. Climbing is a skill. You can literally just climb everything. You're just a spider monkey.
Yeah, it's like that Zelda game that came out years back.
Yeah. So I'm just like, I got to kill some time. I'll just climb this building and just wait up here for a little while. So it's been pretty enjoyable so far, and substantial. Either I made a shockingly good character, or I'm pretty lucky so far, or it's not quite as brutal as the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena and Battlespire, although I've been told that it's basically equal difficulty. So I don't know if I've just been lucky so far. It's hard to tell so far. But I'm certainly.
Rob's asking if the enemies can climb. I don't think they can, but I don't know for
they
sure.
do not seem like they can, although they are horrible at night and come out and beat the crap out of me. So I'm definitely excited to play some more of it. I'm surprised how much I enjoyed my first few hours with the game.
Awesome. And people can check that out on the Lotus of Doom Twitch
so I'm
channel.
Streaming it. I won't be playing it off stream just like I did with the others. I'm going to do the entire playthrough live, and then I will upload the VODs to YouTube, which is just Lotus of Doom as well on YouTube. And unlike the other ones that I had done, I'm actually breaking them into more reasonable episodes. So hopefully they'll be a little more watchable just for people's convenience. Just because people had requested to have an on-demand version of them from the previous two playthroughs, because these are not super commonly played games, and they're pretty rough to go back to if you don't have a lot of patience. So the fact that people are interested in this, I want to make it so that people can check out as much as they would like with it. So I'm trying to keep them to like hour and a half chunks. Even if I have like a 5-hour stream, I'll break it into pieces and release it like that for people. So it's a little more watchable, hopefully. Apparently the first 2 episodes are better than how it had previously been done. So hopefully that will continue forward. I'll just do minimal editing for them.
That's great. Awesome. Yeah, go check that out if you're interested. Always a good time to watch Lotus torture himself. And
so I hear.
It's always good fun. And I've got all my stuff, all the shows on the network, robotsradio.net, a bunch of other stuff there, and my stream over at twitch.tv/robotsradio, where I'm doing some wacky Skyrim and Fallout VR stuff.
VR stuff is very entertaining so far.
Have you seen the videos?
Yeah. I watched the one you posted in Discord.
There's a second one, I think.
I haven't seen the second one yet. I saw the first one with the Barbus thumbnail because you were looking for input on the thumbnail idea.
Yeah,
so
I've changed the thumbnails
I've seen so far.
I'm playing the YouTube game where I keep changing the thumbnails and the titles to see if I can increase the click-through rate.
It works. Screw with it.
It absolutely works.
Really? Well, it's funny because I might pick your brain a little after the show. This is like super behind the scenes.
Yeah, no problem.
I was going to say, because as I say, like you're the reason I actually love my title screen for the Dungeon Tales series. You just like punched one up. I got to do something for the live stream things. Like I need like some type of cover art for these rather than literally just I take the least awkward looking still frame that YouTube suggests. I'm like, good enough. And I throw that up.
Right.
I think I actually want to do one for the series, each of the series.
Dude,
so
I've got an idea. I've got an idea for you. Okay. We'll talk later. We'll talk later. But yeah, go check out all our stuff. We put lots of content out there. We hope you guys enjoy it. That's why we do
Hopefully it's fun.
Yeah. Hopefully it's fun. And let us know what you think. But that's it for this episode. We'll be back next week with our patrons and maybe some of our new patrons. We're just going to have to find out. And make sure to send us some thoughts over on the Discord and the Patreon channel. And that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good week. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach me on Twitter at robots_radio or Lotus of Doom at Lotus of Doom. Also, you can join us on the Robots Radio Discord channel. You can easily just search Robots Radio Discord on Google or check the description underneath the podcast. Also, this podcast is recorded live every week on Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on the Robots Radio channels on Twitch, YouTube, and on Facebook. So just search Robots Radio on any of those platforms. Come join us. We'd love to chat with you while we record the show, or before or after. Either way, just come hang out with us. And if you're looking for more information about my shows and the shows on the Robots Radio Network, go to robotsradio.net for all the information about all the shows on the network, including the Robots Radio Rocket Club, where I help both new and existing podcasters to grow their shows, build their audiences, and create the best podcast they possibly can. All of that at robotsradio.net. We'll see you next time.